I stood in my own living room, the teacup still warm in my hand, as my son looked up from his laptop and said, "We'll just sell your jewelry, Mom." No eye contact, no hesitation, just spreadsheets and certainty, as if I were already gone. My daughter chimed in from the couch. Gold's high right now, without even glancing at me. After raising them, after burying their father, after carrying this family through every storm, I had become an inventory line, a liquidation item. Not their mother, just someone with things they wanted. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. He said it like he was asking about dinner. "We'll just sell your jewelry, Mom." He said it so casually, like he was asking what I wanted for dinner. "We'll just sell your jewelry, Mom." Just like that. No hesitation, no eye contact. He was staring at his laptop, pulling up some budget template, his mouth half turned in that managerial way he had when he thought he was solving something. I felt my fingers tighten around the teacup in my hand. It was bone china, blue roses around the rim, a wedding gift from my aunt. One of the few things I hadn't let slip through the cracks. Sophie chimed in without lifting her eyes from her phone. Gold's high right now. She was curled up on the couch, legs tucked under her, scrolling as if the rest of me wasn't sitting right here. I lowered the cup to its saucer carefully, the clink sounding louder than I expected. "I see," I said. Not the kind of "I see" that means agreement. The kind that means I'm watching you. Neither of them noticed. Daniel tapped something into a spreadsheet. "If it's real gold and you've got enough pieces, you're looking at maybe 6, 7,000, depending on weight, condition. We can catalog it tomorrow." Catalog it. Like a garage sale. Sophie muttered something about calling 2 jewelry stores on Monday. Her voice faded into background static as they slid effortlessly into logistics, splitting pieces into piles, appraise, melt, consign. They didn't ask which ones had stories, didn't remember the bracelet Harold gave me the night we lost the baby, didn't care that the emerald studs had been promised to Sophie when she was 12. She used to sneak into my room and wear them around, pretending she was on the Oscars red carpet. Now she was talking about pawn shops. I stood. Slowly. Neither of them looked up. "I'm going to lie down," I said. "Long day." "Okay," Daniel mumbled. "Night," Sophie added, thumb still swiping. In my bedroom, I moved by habit. Shut the door, closed the curtains, turned on the lamp, and then I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. The jewelry box sat untouched on the vanity. Lacquered wood, hinges slightly worn. I opened it with both hands, careful, like I was lifting something sacred. Inside, order. Necklaces in silk slots, earrings resting in felt. But most of it wasn't real. Years ago, I'd started replacing the genuine pieces with replicas. The real ones had gone into a small safe deposit box after Harold's second health scare. Even then, I'd known things were shifting. People notice when you have something they want. Still, the replicas had their weight, their presence. You could wear them and remember. The night at the symphony, the anniversary dinner in New Orleans, the Christmas Eve when Daniel, still in braces, slipped a ring box into my stocking as a joke. It was one of my old rings he'd found in the laundry room, but the thought behind it had made me cry. Now they were tallying me up like a portfolio in decline. I reached toward the bottom of the box, past the false floor. Just enough room for 2 or 3 real pieces. I touched them only briefly. I didn't need to take them out. I just needed to know they were still there. And then, softly, to no one but the dark, "You'll learn value the hard way." I didn't mean it cruelly. I meant it the way you say a prayer, or a promise. People reveal themselves when you have what they want. The next morning, Daniel stood at the kitchen counter like he owned it. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't even sit. Just read off a name like it was a headline. Guy in Chestnut Hill, certified gemologist. I booked him for Thursday. He'll take a look at Mom's pieces, give us a real number. Mom's pieces, like I was already a line item in probate. I stirred my tea and smiled without looking up. Of course, dear, that sounds very thorough. That word seemed to satisfy him. Thorough. As if we were managing a project, not a life. They left mid-morning, Daniel to the co-working space he called the office, Sophie to whatever appointment she was pretending not to be late for. Their coats still hung by the door. They weren't going far, which gave me just enough time. I closed the bedroom door behind me and turned the lock. Not because I thought they'd barge in, but because the act itself made me feel deliberate. Then I laid out 2 boxes side by side on the bed, the original and a nearly identical decoy I'd used for years when teaching my art students about design principles. I used to run a jewelry design unit every spring. They loved it. So did I. I opened both lids slowly, reverently, like I was breathing in the last few minutes of something. The real ones first. The sapphire teardrop. The bracelet with the Venetian links. The original wedding band. The pearl drops. My mother's brooch. One by one, I cradled them in tissue and slid them into the felt-lined case that would travel with me downtown. Then I opened the art class kit. Plastic, brass, glass. Each piece chosen to resemble just closely enough, not cheap junk, but not real either. Passable to the untrained eye, believable enough for a son who hadn't asked the right questions. Carolyn appeared in the doorway as I was halfway through. She froze, brow furrowing. "You're packing?" Her voice was cautious, careful. She'd seen enough over the last few months to sense a shift, even if she didn't understand it yet. I didn't stop moving. Just handed her a pair of tweezers and nodded toward the necklace tray. "Help me swap the chains. The latches have to match, or he'll notice." Caroline stepped in slowly, then looked from one box to the other. Her fingers brushed the fake emerald earrings, the ones I'd used as demonstration props in last year's summer course. "You planned for this?" she said, incredulous. I paused, then met her eyes in the mirror above the vanity. People reveal themselves when you have what they want. She didn't ask who I meant. She didn't need to. We worked in silence for a while, hands steady, movements practiced. She'd helped me before. End of semester prep, travel kits for gallery shows. But this felt different. Quieter. Not performance, but defense. When everything was in place, I closed the replica box, ran my hand across the top. It looked perfect. Maybe even more polished than the original. I took the real case and wrapped it in a cashmere scarf. Slipped it into my largest tote. Then I opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and pulled out the envelope with the bank key. Still warm from where it had been hidden under the quilts. "I'll be back by 3, I told Caroline as I shrugged on my coat. "You want me to come with you?" she asked. "No, it's better if I do this part alone." And it was. Walking into the bank felt like walking into a second skin. The cool air, the hush of carpet under heels. I hadn't used the box in years, but the routine came back effortlessly. Key in, signature, elevator down. Inside the steel room, I lifted the lid and placed the case inside. Tucked it against a folder of old birth certificates and Harold's watch. Then I shut it all away. As I walked back out into the October sun, I realized I wasn't nervous. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. The game had started. They just didn't know I'd already made my move. "No, dear, they're just not what you thought." The man they brought into my home had soft hands and expensive shoes. He arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer and carrying a narrow leather case like a violinist on his way to rehearsal. Daniel met him at the door, practically beaming, ushering him in like he'd just closed escrow on a lake house. "This is Thomas," Daniel said. "Certified gemologist. Sotheby's trained. Real deal." Thomas nodded politely, eyes flicking around the room. He had the kind of smile people mistake for warmth. Professional, practiced. I'd seen better ones. From my students during critique week. Sophie stood in the corner, holding her phone at chin height. "I'm documenting this," she said, angling for light. "For the series. Generational decluttering, what our parents leave behind." She grinned like it was charming. I gave her a long look. "How tasteful." She laughed, mistaking it for sarcasm. Daniel gestured to the box on the coffee table, the replica I'd spent an hour curating to look just imperfect enough, the clasp slightly tarnished, the stones not quite catching the light the way they should. Thomas pulled on a pair of gloves and opened the lid with gentle ceremony. I sat back in my armchair, hands folded in my lap, a polite smile frozen just under the surface. He worked quickly but not carelessly, laying out each piece on the velvet mat he'd brought with him. A chain, a pair of teardrop earrings, the brooch. He examined each with his loupe, murmuring inaudibly to himself. Sophie zoomed in with her phone, narrating. "You can tell he's good. Look how serious he is." She turned the camera toward Daniel. "He found this guy. We wanted to make sure we honored Mom's things." I turned my head slightly toward her. "That's very thoughtful, darling." Her lens dropped a fraction of an inch, but she didn't stop recording. Thomas reached the end of the tray and removed his glasses. His expression had shifted, subtly, but enough for me to notice the tight pull around his mouth. He cleared his throat. "Well, to be frank, most of this appears to be costume jewelry." Daniel blinked. "Sorry, what?" Thomas tapped a ring with his gloved finger. "This, for example. The setting's alloy, not gold. Stone is glass. Very good imitation, though. These earrings, brass, not platinum. Brooch is plated. Could be vintage, but not valuable." The silence that followed was beautiful. Daniel stepped forward, peering down at the tray like Thomas had misread something obvious. "That can't be right. These are my mother's heirlooms. They're—" He stopped, lips parting again. "Mom, did you sell them already?" I met his gaze calmly. "No, dear," I said, smooth as cream. "They're just not what you thought." Sophie lowered her phone slowly. "That's not true." Her voice was quiet, but sharp. "She's lying. You're lying." I turned toward her. She wasn't recording anymore. "You think I'd sell them and keep that a secret?" I asked. "Is that the version of me you know best?" She didn't answer. Daniel didn't either. Thomas, sensing the tension, began quietly packing his tools. "I'll leave my card in case anything else comes to light." Sophie snorted. "Oh, something's come to light, all right." I stood slowly, not defensive, not smug, just rising. "You two always wanted things neat and simple, linear, as if everything I've lived fits on a checklist." Daniel looked stunned. "We were trying to help." I nodded. "I know. That's what makes it harder to forgive." I walked toward the hallway, leaving the replica box open, the glass gems catching the afternoon light in all the wrong ways. Behind me, I heard Sophie whisper, almost to herself, "She's playing us." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. And I am family. They waited until after dinner to corner me, as if their timing made them more civil. Daniel came alone first, knocking on the frame of the study door like he didn't already live here half the week. I was reading. A Muriel Spark novel. He didn't notice. "Can we talk?" I nodded and set the book aside, closing it without marking the page. He didn't sit, just hovered in that pacing way of his, like the energy had to go somewhere, or he'd fracture from the pressure of not saying what he'd already decided to say. "Look," he began, "this isn't about being dramatic. This is about clarity, about transparency." He had his lawyer voice on, clipped, orderly, preemptively disappointed. "Dad left that collection to the family," he said. "Not to you. To us. Collectively." I tilted my head, slowly. "And I am family." He exhaled through his nose like I was being difficult on purpose. "You know what I mean." "No," I said, folding my hands. "I truly don't." He was about to reply when Sophie walked in, uninvited, holding her phone again, not recording this time. Her face was tight, her tone sharper than it had been all day. "You've been hiding money," she said. "That's what this is. You just don't want us to have any control over it. You're selfish." The word sat there, thick and adolescent, like she'd been saving it since she was 16. I stood, slowly, like I had all the time in the world. "I'm not selfish," I said. "I'm selective." Sophie scoffed. "That's just branding." Daniel stepped in again, his voice louder now. "We're going to have the estate documents reviewed. All of them. We'll get clarity." There it was. Not a threat exactly. A formality disguised as one. But I saw it for what it was. A crack. A pivot point. "You're welcome to do that," I said evenly. "It's all public record. I haven't touched what I wasn't entitled to. Harold made sure of that. So did the firm." He hesitated. Not because he didn't believe me. Because he did. And that was worse. Because he knew I was right. And it still wasn't enough. "You're rewriting history," Sophie muttered. "You're hoarding things out of spite." I turned to her then. Finally. She looked like someone standing in the ashes of something they'd set fire to, surprised it burned so fast. "You think this is about things?" I asked her. "About stones and gold and a stack of forms in a safety folder?" She didn't answer. "I spent my entire marriage giving pieces of myself away," I said. "Your father didn't ask me to." "Not always. But it was expected. And I did it, because I believed in the shape we were making, because I thought it would hold." Daniel folded his arms. "This isn't about your marriage." "It's all about my marriage," I said. "You just didn't notice the cracks because they weren't yours to live in." Silence again. Not peace. The pause before another swing. "I think we're done here," I said quietly. "You'll find what you're looking for in the files, but I doubt it'll give you what you want." I walked past them, out into the hallway. Their voices didn't follow. That night, I slept lightly. Shoes by the door, coat draped over the arm of the couch like I might need to leave fast. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to be ready. At 7:15 the next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used since Harold's funeral. It rang twice before I heard the same warm rasp that once negotiated a 10-figure merger in Milan and still remembered to send handwritten holiday cards. "Edwin Ross," the voice said. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "They've declared war," I said. A pause. "Then let's make sure you win it. If they want to measure worth, I'll teach them its price." Edwin arrived just before noon, wrapped in a charcoal overcoat that looked somehow both expensive and forgotten. He stepped through the door like someone who'd been here once in another life, and maybe he had. At the will signing, after Harold's memorial. The air back then had smelled like lilies and disappointment. He held his briefcase in one hand and an insulated paper bag in the other. "I brought scones," he said. "You always hated the ones Harold liked." I let out the smallest breath of a laugh and motioned toward the kitchen. He followed, placing the bag gently on the counter and the briefcase beside the sink, as if legal truth could be unpacked just as casually as pastry. We sat at the kitchen table. No rush, no dramatics. Edwin didn't traffic in either. But when he opened the briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, he laid it in front of me with both hands, like a priest delivering a sacrament. Do you remember the codicil your husband added? Late 2019? I blinked. The what? Edwin tapped the second page of the document, careful not to crease it. His fingers, elegant and methodical, had once unspooled trust funds and shielded board members from ruin. Today, they revealed a single line in Harold's shaky but deliberate handwriting. A clause affirming full discretionary authority to Grace Margaret Dwyer over all heirloom property, tangible and intangible, excluding it from shared family asset pools. I stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves. I thought that was about the piano. It included the piano, Edwin said, but it covered everything cataloged under family heirlooms, jewelry, collectibles, art, the entire safe, contents, even the old letters. But Harold never told me. He folded his hands. No, he meant to surprise you. He said he wanted to make sure you decided what held value, that no one else could put a price on what mattered most to you. Something in my chest shifted, quietly but permanently, like a lock clicking closed, or a door opening at the end of a long hallway. So they can't contest it? I said, still unsure whether I was asking or confirming. They can scream all they want, Edwin replied, but legally, they can't touch a thing. I leaned back, letting the information settle. The silence in the room changed shape, less like an absence, more like armor. Then they'll come for me emotionally, I said. Edwin nodded, unsurprised. That's often the second strategy, especially when they've got nothing else to stand on. And if I counter? I asked. If I push first? Then they'll either fold, he said, or show you exactly how small their hand is. We didn't speak for a long moment. Outside, a gust of wind rustled the oak branches, scattering dead leaves like coins across the back patio. The kind of weather Harold loved, sharp and moody. I stood, walked to the sideboard, and pulled out the small file folder I'd kept there for years. It held the basics: my will, power of attorney, banking info, the responsible pieces of a life. I handed it to Edwin without ceremony. Let's update everything. I want the safe deposit contents transferred to Maya. Full legal ownership. She's the only one who's earned anything. He didn't ask why. Edwin never asked why. That was his grace. I'll courier it today, he said. It'll be on file by Friday. As he packed up, I walked him to the door. The sun had come out again, but weakly. Autumn light, filtered and thin. He turned at the threshold. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next? I didn't hesitate. If they want to measure worth, I said, I'll teach them its price. And then I shut the door behind him. You're wicked. The invitation came in a group text. Dinner at our place. Just us. Let's talk like family again. I stared at it for a while before responding. Looking forward to it, I typed, then added a heart emoji. One Sophie had once taught me how to use. A peace offering they'd think they earned. The dining room was staged when I arrived. Soft jazz playing, candles lit, cloth napkins folded like we were commemorating something instead of recovering from it. Sophie met me at the door with too much enthusiasm, cheeks flushed from whatever she'd been sipping before I arrived. You look beautiful, Mom, she said, kissing me lightly on the cheek. That scarf is new, right? It wasn't. But it had belonged to Maya's mother, and I wore it now like a quiet flag. Daniel hovered at the kitchen island, carving roasted chicken like he'd spent the day rehearsing civility. We've been doing a lot of thinking, he said. You were right to be upset. Things got out of hand. Sophie poured wine. We let stress cloud what matters. It's been a hard year. I nodded gently, watching them over the rim of my glass. They were trying to act like grown children again, the kind who bring dessert and apologize with practiced sincerity. "We want to make it right," Daniel said, placing the platter on the table. "No more conflict. No more tension." I smiled politely and unfolded my napkin. Dinner was oddly pleasant. They asked about my art classes, nodded at the right moments. Sophie even complimented the earrings I'd worn. Replicas, naturally, but well chosen. For 45 minutes, it felt almost normal. Too normal. Then, right after dessert, lemon tart, from the bakery I loved, Daniel reached down and pulled out a manila folder. I knew before he even placed it beside my plate. "We've been working with a financial advisor," he said smoothly. "Nothing drastic, just planning ahead. We thought a joint account might simplify things." I glanced down. The form was neat, well printed, with my name already typed in the signature line, a modest monthly withdrawal cap, consolidated assets. His name listed first. Sophie leaned in, hopeful. "You wouldn't have to do anything. It's just to keep things smooth. For the family." It was almost a good lie. I picked up the pen he'd set beside the folder. The one with the embossed law firm logo he thought I wouldn't recognize. Caroline caught my eye from across the table. She'd been unusually quiet all evening, eyes darting between them and me like she was watching a silent play with a twist she already knew was coming. I didn't rush. I uncapped the pen slowly, smoothed the paper. And then, with deliberate grace, I wrote my name in the center of the line, clean, looping calligraphy that I'd practiced every Sunday afternoon, back when Harold used to read the Times aloud like scripture. But I didn't write Grace Ellison. I signed Grace Ross. I laid the pen down gently. Neither of them noticed. Sophie was already reaching for her phone again. "We can scan it in tonight," she said. "I'll send it to Sam first thing tomorrow." Caroline's lips twitched. I stood slowly. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "It was good to see you both making an effort." Daniel looked pleased. "We just want things to feel right again." I leaned down and kissed his cheek. "Then stop trying so hard to control them." I picked up my coat. Caroline followed me out. We were halfway down the walkway before she let out a breath that turned into a laugh. "You're wicked," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd actually sign it." I looked up at the stars. "I didn't." She frowned. "But—" "Grace Ross," I said. "Ye legally updated as of this morning." Caroline burst out laughing, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed with her. No, my backbone is patience. The bank was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet only marble walls and soft leather chairs could create. No Christmas music yet, just the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional polite cough. I stepped through the revolving door like I was stepping into a memory. The same tall ceilings. The same security guard who nodded without checking his clipboard. The teller behind the glass looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Ross," or, should I say, "Ms. Ross again?" I returned the smile. "Let's go with Ms. today." She leaned slightly toward the mic. "Still have your husband's trust file in the archive. Haven't seen that name come up in a while." I nodded once. "I'll need access to the safe deposit box, number 233. She made a few quick entries on the screen, then gestured toward the corridor behind the teller booths. A guard buzzed open the frosted door, and I followed him down the narrow hallway, carpeted in silence. The vault room was the same as it had always been, sterile and hushed, with brushed steel doors stretching like filing cabinets toward the back wall. He unlocked mine and handed me the long, slender case. "Take all the time you need, Ms. Ross." I sat at the small metal table in the corner and pulled the lid open like I was peeling back a layer of time. The velvet case fit snugly inside, the one I'd packed that day in a rush of resolve, not knowing when I'd need to see it again. I lifted the top. The jewelry gleamed even in the dim light, rich, unapologetic. The sapphire teardrop, The Venetian link bracelet, the pearl drops, still nestled like tiny moons against the felt. But there was more than I remembered. Underneath the tray sat 2 folded property deeds, one to the lake house Harold sold before the kids were old enough to remember it, and one to a parcel of land I hadn't seen since our honeymoon. And then, tucked flat against the base of the box, was a white envelope, unsealed, yellowed faintly around the edges, my name written in Harold's hand. No date, just a single line across the front, in case they forget your worth. The breath caught in my throat before I realized it. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. I just held it, the weight of it heavier than its paper should allow. For a moment I just sat there, completely still, with diamonds catching light like constellations beside me. And then I cried. Not the loud, cinematic sobbing kind. Just the silent kind. The kind that leaks out slowly, reverently. A kind of release that felt closer to remembering than mourning. I reached into my purse and took out the small pocket camera I'd brought for Edwin's records. One by one, I documented each piece. Clear, careful photos under the table lamp, each angle precise. The bracelet, the deeds, even the envelope. Evidence. Not for the courts. For the truth. When I left the vault, the air outside felt clearer. Not lighter, just cleaner, like something had been filtered out. Caroline was waiting in the car. She leaned across and opened the passenger door without a word. Her eyes flicked to my face, then to my hands, still clenched lightly around my purse. "You saw it all again," she said quietly. I nodded once. She hesitated. "Was it good to see?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "Not good, but grounding." She smiled faintly. "That box is your backbone." I looked out the windshield as the light turned green, the city moving around us like it didn't know what we just walked through. "No," I said softly. "My backbone is patience. Let them. Kindness reveals contrast." By mid-November, the cracks in their lives had started to show. Daniel's consulting firm, his boutique advisory practice, as he called it, was bleeding clients. Something about overdue deliverables, a missed investor call. He didn't say much outright, but I heard the tension in his voice when he left voicemails in the den, speaking just loud enough for the walls to understand him. Sophie, meanwhile, had pivoted again, this time to conscious lifestyle branding. Her latest video had just 312 views, and the comments had turned snide. She called it algorithm fatigue. I called it overexposure. The requests came quickly after that. First, it was Daniel asking if I'd mind floating a little liquidity while a vendor invoice cleared. Then Sophie texting late at night about a bridging loan for a photography workshop in Palm Springs. They dressed the asks in language they thought sounded professional, strategic, polished. But I recognized the shape of desperation beneath it. I responded with warmth and misdirection. One afternoon, I texted Daniel a photo of an old checkbook I hadn't used since the Bush administration. "Can I still use this one?" I wrote. "I can't remember if this was the joint account." He didn't reply for 6 hours. I mailed Sophie a birthday card with a blank check tucked inside. I knew she'd find it, but the check had no date, no amount, no signature. Just a note. "Love you always. Use what you need." She posted about it later, subtly, but loud enough. A photo of the check, blurred, with the caption, "When you're too rich to notice cognitive decline." The comments were full of laughing emojis and fire reactions. Maya saw it before I did. She burst into the kitchen that night, phone still in her hand, cheeks red with something I rarely saw in her: fury. "She called you senile," she said, voice trembling. "In front of everyone, on the internet. She's disgusting." I set down the tea towel and took the phone from her, read the post once, twice, then handed it back. "She's scared," I said gently. That doesn't give her the right? No, I agreed. But it does make her predictable. Maya crossed her arms. So you're just going to let her say that? I smiled. Let them. Kindness reveals contrast. She blinked. What does that even mean? It means, I said, brushing a crumb from the counter, that the more generous I am, the more obvious it becomes that they're not. Truth needs no spotlight. It just waits for the lights to burn out. She sat at the table, still shaking her head. I don't get how you stay so calm. I sat beside her. Calm isn't a mood. It's a tool, and you only sharpen it when you need it. That night, I called Edwin from the garden. The wind was picking up, brittle and cold through the branches, but I liked the sound of it. It reminded me that time keeps moving, whether people want it to or not. They're pressing harder, I said. I think they're running out of subtle. His voice on the line was as even as ever. They're about to cross a line. What kind? The kind you don't come back from. I nodded, knowing he couldn't see it. Let them. He paused. You always were more dangerous when you smiled. I hung up and stood still for a moment, watching the leaves whip across the grass. Inside, the lights were warm. Maya was playing piano in the front room. And upstairs, my documents sat quietly in their folder. No defense lawyers needed. Just time. Just patience. The weaker they think I am, the stronger my next move becomes. The explosion came on a Thursday night. Not a dramatic one. No thrown plates, no slammed doors. Just the slow burn of words that had been waiting for oxygen. Sophie arrived first, face tense, phone already in her hand. Daniel followed 15 minutes later, wearing the expression of someone walking into court instead of his mother's living room. They didn't sit. They hovered. The air felt crowded with unspoken calculations. Mom, Sophie started, her tone deceptively calm. We've talked, and we think it's time to take some things off your plate. I set down my tea. What kind of things? Bills, she said. Household management, investments, just the big picture stuff. Daniel folded his arms. We can help you make decisions before they become problems. I nodded once. Before I become a problem, you mean? That landed. Sophie's jaw flexed. Daniel's voice tightened. Don't twist this, he said. We're trying to protect you. From what? He hesitated just long enough for her to fill the silence. From yourself, Sophie snapped. You're useless, Grace. We'll take care of everything you can't. The word useless hit harder than it should have, not because it was true, but because it was what she'd always feared becoming. For a second, my hand trembled as I reached for the tea again. Then I set it down and adjusted the phone on the table, angling it just slightly toward them. The red light blinked, once, faintly, and began recording. You think this house runs itself? I asked softly. You think life just organizes around you? Sophie laughed, sharp and cold. We're done pretending you're capable of managing any of this. Daniel didn't stop her. He just looked tired, angry, cornered by his own failures. When the argument finally ended, the house felt hollow. They left in a storm of indignation, doors slamming, headlights cutting across the windows like flashbulbs at an arrest scene. I didn't move for a long time, just stared at the empty doorway and the faint reflection of myself in the dark glass. Still, small, almost spectral. Then I unlocked my phone, listened. Every word, every insult, every misstep. Clear as confession. The next day, Daniel called. I didn't answer. Then came a text. We'll talk tomorrow. You're not making sense anymore. By evening, he was at the door again, pacing the foyer before I could even hang up my coat. His voice was sharper this time, stripped of all the pretense of civility. You can't keep stonewalling us, Mom. We've been patient. But if you can't contribute, Financially, mentally, we'll have to make decisions for you. Decisions, I said. Such as? Assisted living, he said. You'd be better cared for there. He said it like it was mercy. Something in me went still, the kind of still that happens right before precision. I see, I said, nodding once. I'll think about that. He left satisfied, mistaking silence for surrender. The minute the door closed, I sent the audio file to Edwin. Labeled, dated, backed up to the cloud. The call came half an hour later. His tone wasn't shocked, just quietly impressed. Well, he said, that's not coercion, that's open and shut elder abuse. I exhaled. So it's enough. It's more than enough, he said, but don't show it yet. Let them think they've won first. I smiled, small but steady. You think I can pull that off? He laughed softly. Grace, you've been pulling it off for months. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring down at my hands. For once, the tremor wasn't from anger. It was from control. The deliberate kind. The kind that could dismantle an empire without ever raising a voice. I pressed my fingers to my lips, like sealing a promise. Then whispered to the quiet room, the weaker they think I am, the stronger my next move becomes. Politeness is my sharpest blade. The paperwork arrived in a plain envelope. No return address, just a small embossed R in the corner. Edwin's way of saying, you're protected before they even open the gate. Inside, a single-page amendment, notarized and perfectly worded. The trust had been filed that morning, clean as glass. Everything I owned, the jewelry, the land, even the old watch collection Harold used to polish on Sunday afternoons, now belonged to a private trust in Maya's name, not visible, not vulnerable, not Daniel's, not Sophie's. I signed in blue ink, slowly, deliberately, then slid the page into the locked drawer beneath my sewing machine, beneath bolts of unused fabric I no longer pretended I'd hem. That night, I slept deeply. The next morning, Sophie arrived without warning. Hair curled, blazer sharp, and a new tote bag that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She smiled like someone hosting a charity gala. "Morning, Mom," she said brightly, stepping inside before I had the chance to invite her. "Just came by to help sort a few of Dad's old files. I remembered you kept some of the estate documents here." I let the moment breathe. "You remembered that, did you?" I said. "Of course," she replied, breezing past me into the study. "We should get ahead of any confusion, you know. Financial clarity is good for everyone." I smiled as I walked to the bookshelf and reached behind the row of cookbooks, pulling out a folder I'd assembled the night before. It was perfect. Doctored bank statements, account balances from years ago, a spreadsheet I'd found from an online budgeting course, even a mock letter from a fictional CPA named Ronald Kessler. I'd typed it myself on Harold's old letterhead and printed it on thick, official paper. I handed it to her with both hands. "Here you are, sweetheart. Everything I have." She took it eagerly, flipping through the first few pages like she could already feel the victory forming. Her voice was syrupy. "This makes it so much easier. Thank you, Mom." "You're welcome," I said, and meant it. She left 10 minutes later, folder clutched to her chest like a prize she hadn't earned. Caroline walked in just as the front door clicked shut behind Sophie. She saw my face, the stillness there, and narrowed her eyes. "What did you just do?" I didn't answer right away. I walked to the teapot, poured myself a cup, and sat at the breakfast table like it was any other Tuesday. "I gave her exactly what she came for," I said. Caroline dropped into the chair across from me. "You're serving revenge with silver spoons." I stirred my tea. "Politeness is my sharpest blade." She laughed once, half shocked. "God, you're terrifying." Only to people who forget I'm still here. I reached into the drawer by the sink and pulled out the real folder. Slim, sealed, legal. Everything now belonged to Maya, and none of it could be traced until I wanted it to be. Caroline looked down at it. So that's it? It's done? I nodded. Everything's where it should be. We sat in silence for a while, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Outside, the oak trees were shedding their last golden leaves. Inside, the chessboard was almost clear. They thought the game was about access, but it had always been about legacy. Dependence is temporary. Consequences aren't. He didn't knock this time. The door flew open just past 9, and Daniel walked in like he had a warrant. Behind him, a woman in a beige suit and narrow glasses followed with a thin leather briefcase and a colder smile. "Her name is Melissa Gray," he announced like it was supposed to mean something. "Estate protection attorney. We've taken preliminary legal action to safeguard your finances while we assess capacity." Capacity. He said it like it was a polite synonym for incompetence. I stayed seated at the table, folding a cloth napkin with more care than necessary. "We're freezing your accounts," he said. "For your protection, of course. Nothing permanent unless you challenge the filing, but that would require a court appearance, and frankly, Mom, I don't think that would be wise." Sophie appeared in the doorway moments later, panting from the effort of catching up, lipstick too red for the hour. "We're not the enemy here," she added, eyes dancing. "This is just about structure, about safety." I let the silence stretch. Then, "Do what you must." Daniel hesitated. He expected protest, or at least panic. But I simply pushed the folder across the table, the one with the decoy bank statements they'd already seen, the outdated ledgers, the cobwebbed numbers tied to long-closed accounts. Melissa took it and nodded once. "We'll be retaining all current documents under conservatorship for now." "Of course," I said, standing. "You'll find them delightfully hollow." They didn't hear that part. Or they pretended not to. Sophie followed Melissa out with a spring in her step, pausing at the door just long enough to twist the knife. "Well," she said, smiling too wide, "I guess now you'll have to depend on us. Funny how that works out." I walked her out with my hand resting lightly on the doorframe. "Dependence," I said softly, "is temporary." She turned back, confused. "Consequences," I finished, "aren't." I shut the door before she could find a response. That night, I sat on the porch with Caroline, both of us wrapped in the old wool throws I used to save for guests. The air smelled like cold pine and distant rain. She poured the wine without asking. "Well," she said. "How bad was it?" "Predictable," I said. "Almost disappointingly so." She raised her glass. "To your enemies underestimating you." Again. I clinked mine against hers, the crystal sounding sharper than usual. An hour later, Edwin's name lit up my phone. I stepped into the study and answered on the second ring. "It's done," he said. "Filed, confirmed. The countersuit is active as of this evening." "What grounds?" "Emotional coercion, attempted financial fraud, abuse of fiduciary trust, and elder intimidation, documented with time-stamped recordings." "Good," I said. "And the trust?" "Untouchable," he confirmed. Daniel and Sophie just swung at shadows. We didn't speak for a moment. Just let the quiet settle. Then he added, "You'll need to decide how public this gets." "I've already decided," I said. "We do this privately, but visibly." He laughed, soft and admiring. "You really were wasted on that marriage." "No," I said. "I just took my time blooming." When I returned to the porch, Caroline handed me the last inch of red in her glass. "Tomorrow's their education," she said, almost to herself. "They won't pass the class," I replied. "But they'll never forget the syllabus." She laughed until she choked. We sat in silence, watching the dark wrap itself around the yard like velvet. They thought they'd turn the key, but they never saw the locks I changed behind them. Victory never looked so graceful. The courtroom was too warm, like they hadn't figured out how to adjust the heating for fall. The air buzzed faintly with whispers and fluorescent lights. A bailiff coughed once, and it echoed like a threat. Daniel sat at the petitioner's table, jaw tight, tie slightly askew. He didn't look at me. Sophie sat 2 rows behind him, buried in her phone, tapping so aggressively it was a wonder the screen didn't crack. Her posture screamed practiced indifference. I sat beside Edwin, calm, composed. A charcoal suit I hadn't worn since Harold's memorial. No jewelry, no makeup, just me. The judge entered without fanfare. A woman with silver hair pulled into a low bun, no nonsense in her eyes. She read the docket, adjusted her glasses, and nodded for proceedings to begin. Daniel's attorney stood first. Melissa Gray, all beige and brittle confidence. Your Honor, she began, this case is about the welfare of an aging woman who has demonstrated a recent pattern of irrational financial behavior. Questionable asset transfers, erratic banking activity, and, we believe, diminished decision-making capacity. She spoke with conviction, like she believed her own performance, like she hadn't read past the first page of the script. We are requesting permanent conservatorship of Grace Ellison's estate, she finished, to prevent irreversible misallocation of family assets. The judge nodded. Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Ross? Edwin stood slowly, buttoning his coat with the kind of composure that makes opponents nervous. Your Honor, he said, what's actually at stake here is not capacity, but control. And what's been demonstrated is not incompetence, but calculated deception, by the petitioners, not the respondent. He handed a neatly tabbed binder to the clerk, who delivered it to the bench. Inside, Edwin said, you'll find a full inventory of legally valid asset transfers made before any claims of impairment were filed. You'll also find notarized medical assessments attesting to Ms. Ellison's cognitive health, as well as time-stamped recordings of repeated emotional coercion by both her children. At the word coercion, Daniel's mouth twitched. Further documentation includes false financial claims made by the petitioners, Edwin continued, and the creation of a sham conservatorship under the guise of familial concern. The judge flipped through the binder slowly. Then she picked up a tablet the clerk had cued and pressed play. The courtroom filled with Sophie's voice, cold, sharp. You're useless, Grace. We'll take care of everything you can't. Then Daniel, if you can't contribute, financially, mentally, we'll have to make decisions for you. When the clip ended, you could hear a paperclip drop. Or maybe it was just Daniel's pride. The judge took off her glasses and folded her hands. What I see here, she said, is not elder protection. I see intimidation. I see entitlement. And I see 2 adult children attempting to weaponize legal mechanisms for personal gain. She turned towards Daniel. You threatened and defrauded your mother, she said. And you did it with arrogance. He didn't respond. Couldn't. Then her gaze shifted to Sophie. You, Ms. Ellison, may want to rethink your online presence before anyone else does it for you. A chuckle rippled through the back row. Sophie's cheeks turned blotchy. The judge signed her ruling with a swift stroke. Petition denied. Assets remain under current ownership. Court adjourned. And just like that, it was over. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I stood slowly, nodded once toward the bench, and gathered my coat. Outside, the wind had picked up, sharp, clean, and colder than I remembered. Reporters hovered by the steps, unsure who to follow. I walked past them without a word. Victory doesn't always need a voice. Sometimes it just needs presence. No. From disappointment. Edwin chose the cafe. Of course he did. A discreet little French place tucked off Tremont Street, all frosted glass and the low murmur of weekday business lunches. The kind of setting that said privacy without needing to post a sign. He was already seated when I arrived, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. A small plate of untouched croissants sat between 2 cups of coffee. He rose when he saw me. Habit, not pretense, and motioned to the chair across from him. "Congratulations again," he said, settling back down. "You made quite the impression yesterday. The judge will be quoting you for years." "I didn't say anything," I reminded him, stirring sugar into my cup. "Exactly," he said with a smile. "That's what made it work." For a moment we sat in silence, listening to the sound of the espresso machine hissing like punctuation. Then he slid an envelope across the table, cream-colored, embossed with the bank's seal. "You didn't tell me there were 2 boxes," he said. I smiled, small, unhurried. "Some lessons require repetition." He arched a brow, intrigued but unsurprised. "And what's in this one? More insurance?" I looked down at the envelope. "Something more difficult to value." We met there that afternoon. The same bank, same marble floor, same courteous nod from the guard who still called me Ms. Ross. The vault smelled faintly of metal and polish. I signed the logbook and took the key from the clerk. This box was older, smaller. The hinge gave a soft sigh when I opened it. No velvet trays this time, no glinting stones or polished gold. Just paper. Envelopes, photographs, a few folded notes yellowed at the edges. A life catalogued not in worth, but in witness. I lifted the first photo, Harold, smiling crookedly beside the old lake house before it sold. Behind him, Daniel and Sophie as children, their faces still untouched by hunger for control. Under it, a letter in my own handwriting, one I'd forgotten writing. "Harold, I forgive you for the distance. I hope you forgive me for the armor." There were report cards, newspaper clippings from Sophie's first art show, a kindergarten drawing of a stick figure family with Mom scrawled above the tallest one in purple crayon. Every piece a breadcrumb back through a maze I'd already escaped. At the very bottom lay a fresh sheet of stationery. I pulled a pen from my bag and began to write. The words came easily, each one deliberate, calm. For Maya, never confuse kindness with surrender. They look the same to those who've never learned patience. I placed it on top of the rest, closed the lid, turned the key. When I straightened, Edwin was watching me, not prying, just seeing. "You built a fortress," he said quietly. "Not from wealth, but from foresight." I shook my head. "No, from disappointment." He studied me for a moment, his expression softening. "Does it feel finished?" I exhaled, a slow release I hadn't known I'd been holding. "It feels quiet. That's enough." We walked out together, the city afternoon stretching open ahead of us. Traffic hummed. A street musician played something gentle, and off-key near the corner. It felt, strangely, like beginning again. As we reached the curb, Edwin paused. "You know," he said, "most people fight to be right. You fought to be remembered." I smiled. "That's the only kind of victory that lasts." He tipped his head, then stepped off the curb, leaving me standing in the autumn light. I watched him go, the envelope tucked back into my purse. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel like armor. Just breath. Just space. Revenge had been the weapon, but peace, that was the prize. "No, I've restored it." Maya came on a Sunday. No warning, no agenda. Just a knock on the back door like she used to do when she was a little girl, asking for lemonade in winter. She didn't look like a child anymore. Tall. Settled. But there was still something unguarded in the way she moved. The way she pushed her sleeves up like she expected to be useful. "Can I help with anything?" she asked as I opened the door. I smiled and stepped aside. You already are. We sat in the sunroom, light pouring in through the old panes like it had been waiting for her. On the coffee table, I'd laid out a few of the replica pieces, the ones Sophie had once dismissed and Daniel had never bothered to ask about. But I'd tucked one velvet pouch off to the side, still sealed, still real. Maya picked up one of the faux brooches, turning it in her hands. These are beautiful, she said, even if they're not worth anything. Ah, I said, but they are, just not to everyone. She looked up at me, confused. Worth, I said gently, is never about price. It's about what survives us. Her eyes scanned the table again, slower this time, reverent. Then I reached for the velvet pouch, held it between both hands. This, I said, is yours, but wear them with humility. They've seen more than you have. She opened it slowly, lips parting as the light caught the edge of the sapphire pendant, the soft gleam of pearl drops beside it. These were in the vault, she whispered. The real ones. I nodded. I don't deserve this, she said softly. You will, I replied, if you stay curious, if you stay kind. She blinked hard, swallowing. I'll never be like them. I reached for her hand. Then promise me something. She nodded quickly. Be better, I said, not bitter. She met my eyes, and for a long moment, there was no shadow between us, no fracture, no wound, no bloodline echo. I promise, she said. After she left, pouch in her pocket, shoulders straighter, I returned to the writing desk in the corner of the room. The same one Harold had once gifted me after my first gallery showing. I used to hate the brass hardware. Now it felt historic. I pulled out a fresh sheet of letterhead and began to write. Effective immediately, all contents of both vaults, including personal and real property, shall transfer to Maya Rose Ellison in full upon her 21st birthday. Until then, she will hold durable power of observation and my confidence. I signed it slowly, dated it, and slid it into the envelope marked Final Instructions, Grace Ross. Behind me, Caroline leaned in the doorway with a mug of coffee and a smirk. She knows, you know, she said. I turned slightly. Knows what? That she's the heir, she replied. Not just to your things, to your choices. I leaned back in the chair, the ache in my spine less urgent than it used to be. Good. Then she'll protect them. Caroline stepped into the room, setting the mug down beside the envelope. You've rewritten legacy. I shook my head, smiling. No, I said. I've restored it. We stood there for a while, neither of us speaking. Outside, the trees were bare now, honest in their emptiness, preparing for what came next. Inside, everything was exactly where it needed to be. Some treasures can't be priced, only proven. The vault was colder than I remembered, not bitter, but purposeful. The kind of cold that reminded you where you were, below ground, surrounded by steel, privacy carved into silence. Even the hum of the security lights felt lower today, like the building understood this was not a transaction, but a benediction. The clerk didn't ask questions. He never did. He simply nodded, reached beneath the counter, and handed me the slender brass key. Box 233. The number I knew like a date. The door clicked behind me with a hush. I walked slowly down the narrow hallway, counting each step. Not out of nervousness, out of ritual. 12 steps to the vault, 2 turns of the key. A weight lifted from its cradle like a secret exhaled. The box was heavier than it had been the first time, but I'd changed too. Strength wasn't a thing you could measure by what you carried, only by what you could let go of. At the table, I laid it down gently. My fingers paused on the lid. It was a final gesture, not of surrender, but of ceremony. Inside, the velvet still held its shape. The jewelry gleamed under the soft fluorescent light, indifferent to the drama that had once threatened to scatter it. The sapphire teardrop winked from its corner. The pearl drops still nested in soft linen like moons tucked into twilight. Next to them, a new envelope, cream-colored, labeled in my handwriting, final instructions, Grace Ross signed, sealed, untouched, since the day I'd placed it there. A will is not a declaration of power, it's an act of trust. A final brushstroke on a portrait no one else can revise, and this one was mine, untouched by revision, unedited by guilt. I closed the lid carefully, pressed the latch into place, and turned the key until I heard the quiet click. Safe, I whispered, just like I planned. It echoed slightly in the quiet, not in volume, but in permanence. Outside, the rain had started again. Not a storm, just a soft drizzle painting the sidewalk in silver. The kind of rain that didn't chase you. It followed you gently, like a memory refusing to fade. Maya waited beneath the overhang, her coat belted tight, umbrella folded under her arm like a flag she didn't feel the need to raise. She spotted me and smiled, that half smile of hers, uncertain but steady. I walked to her, letting the rain brush against my coat sleeves. "Everything all right?" she asked. "It is now," I said. She hesitated, shifting her weight slightly. "Dad called this morning," she said quietly. "He wants to talk. Said he's been thinking about things." I raised my eyebrows but said nothing. She continued. "He didn't say much, just that he owes you an apology." I looked out across the street. Cars passed in slow, wet lines. People moved quickly, hunched beneath umbrellas or braced against the wind, too busy to notice anything still. "And do you think he means it?" I asked. She shrugged. "I think he might mean part of it, and I think he wants the rest to be true." I gave a small, dry laugh, not cruel, just weary. "Then maybe," I said, "he's learning the price of what he tried to take." She nodded once. "It's not just about the jewelry, is it?" "No," I said. "It never was." We began walking toward the corner, our pace unhurried. The rain softened around us, misting gently across the pavement. Our reflections blurred in the wet glass storefronts, two women of different generations, moving with the same rhythm. At the light, she slipped her hand into mine, casually, like she used to when she was 5 and unsure about crosswalks. "I still think about what you said," she murmured, "about kindness and surrender. And," she looked at me, "I think maybe the difference is in who's watching." I smiled. "You're getting wiser faster than I did." I had a better teacher. The light turned green. We crossed. Halfway across, I paused. "Do you know what your father said, that first day?" Maya shook her head. "He said, 'We'll just sell your jewelry.' Like it was dinner. Like it was obvious. Like it was his." She winced. "He didn't mean—" "He did," I said. Not harshly. Just truthfully. And that's what matters. Words are weather. Intent is the season. We reached the other curb and she squeezed my hand. "I still can't believe they thought you'd just hand it all over." "Oh, they never thought I would," I said. "They thought I already had." She gave a soft laugh. "So you let them believe it?" "Of course," I said. "The weaker they thought I was, the stronger my next move became." She looked at me for a long time. "You don't hate them, do you?" "No," I said. "I'm simply finished with them." We turned the corner. The rain began to pick up again, slicking the sidewalk into mirrored mosaics. Each puddle like a window to something already gone. At the cafe on the corner, she paused. "Can we sit? Just for a bit?" "Of course." We chose a window table, ordered tea, sat in silence. Outside, the city moved without urgency, people carrying bags, crossing streets, texting in the rain. Life, uninterrupted. She pulled the velvet pouch from her coat and placed it on the table. I haven't worn them yet, she said. Feels like they're still yours. I shook my head. They're not mine. Not anymore. But what's in that pouch? I said gently. That's not what I gave you. She tilted her head. Then what did you give me? Memory, I said, and clarity, and a reason not to forget what dignity looks like in decline, or in defense. She looked down at the pouch, then back at me. You know, she said, you could have just let them win. You had every excuse to. I smiled. And if I had? They'd have gotten what they wanted. No, I said. They'd have gotten what they expected. She sat back in her chair, eyes soft. Grandma? Yes? Thank you. For not giving up. I reached across the table and touched her hand. Thank you, I said, for making it worth not giving up. When we left, the rain had paused. Just a few drops clung to the glass as if reluctant to fall. She opened the umbrella, but I stepped into the open without it. Felt the cold tap of rain against my face, like punctuation at the end of a long, well-argued sentence. Behind me, the bank doors reflected everything. The city, the sky, the woman I had become. He said they'd sell my jewelry, but some treasures can't be priced, only proven, and I had every last piece.